The winters of the Great Plains are ruthless, and when the snow began to fall, some said Lars Nilsen's old-fashioned plow was nothing but a toy. The modern farmers laughed, dismissing his methods as out of place in a world ruled by machinery. But when the storms arrived, the true test of his invention began, and it wasn't the plows on tractors that stood the test of time. Before we begin, share where you're watching from, and if you believe in the value of old traditions and ingenuity, join us for tomorrow's tale. The wind howled through the snow-covered fields as Lars Nilsen stood beside his plow, the icy grip of winter already settling in. His hands gripped the wooden handles of the old-fashioned tool, each knotted with the labor of the land and the memory of his father's lessons. The machine before him, a well-worn steel frame with wooden wheels, stood in stark contrast to the shiny tractors his neighbors were driving, tractors that hummed with power of engines, their metallic bodies designed to slice through the fields with mechanical precision. Lars, a man of Norwegian descent who had settled on the land years before, had learned the value of simplicity in his upbringing. The old ways were still the most dependable, especially when winter demanded the strongest of tools. His plow, though archaic in appearance, had seen him through the worst storms before. Yet the farmers of the area, with their newfangled machinery, couldn't help but chuckle as they passed his modest farm. "You know, Lars," Will Crawford, a neighboring farmer, called out from his tractor, his voice booming across the windswept plain, "that toy of yours won't last a week in a storm like this. You'd be better off using a real plow, one with some horsepower behind it." The others, sitting on their tractors with heated cabins and plows that seemed to cut through the snow like butter, agreed with hearty laughs. "You're wasting your time," they said. "Old iron and wood are no match for these machines." But Lars didn't flinch. His eyes were focused on the work ahead. While others scoffed at the simplicity of his equipment, Lars knew that in the face of nature's fury, the strength of a plow wasn't just about the machine's engine or size. It was about how well it could stand up to the elements, how it could persist when every other machine failed. The world had changed around Lars, and while most farmers embraced progress with open arms, he knew that the more something was built to last, the less likely it would break under pressure. That night, the wind picked up even more fiercely. Lars, accustomed to the biting cold, didn't hesitate to shut the barn doors behind him. The storm outside was beginning to feel like it would be one of the worst of the season. As he sat in his small kitchen, sipping a warm mug of cider, he could hear the howling wind carrying across the fields. His thoughts drifted back to the plow. His father had made it with care, and despite the laughter of his neighbors, Lars knew the test was coming and he would be ready. His quiet faith in his tools, his craftsmanship, and his patience were his true power. The morning sun barely peeked over the horizon when the first flakes of snow began to fall. By noon, the sky had darkened, and the blizzard descended, heavy and merciless, as if the sky itself had turned to ice. Lars walked to the barn and, without hesitation, grabbed his coat, the familiar weight of it grounding him. He didn't rush like the others. His neighbors were likely already in their tractors, engines roaring against the wind, prepared for a day of cutting through the snow. But Lars had no hurry. His plow was ready. Outside, the wind howled, swirling the snow into waves that seemed to stretch endlessly. The white carpet quickly covered the land, but Lars knew the ground well. He knew that no machine could make it through the deep snow and ice without faltering. His plow, on the other hand, wasn't about speed. It was about strength, the kind that didn't need power to endure. As the snow built up around him, Lars set the plow against the earth, guiding it forward with a steady hand. It wasn't easy. The snow was deep and the wind sharp, but with each turn, Lars felt the strength of his work. He wasn't battling the storm as much as he was coexisting with it, moving through the land with respect for its power, not forcing his way through. The modern machines would likely fail soon enough. The snow would clog their engines, freeze the gears, and seize up their systems. He had seen it happen before, but Lars's plow was different. It had no engine to overheat, no fragile parts to freeze, just the solid work of wood and steel, designed to stand up to the seasons. By late afternoon, the storm had reached its full force. The wind was relentless, and visibility was reduced to only a few yards. But Lars kept working, carving a path through the snow. It wasn't fast work, but it was steady. With every pass, he chipped away at the snow, laying down a clean, steady path across his land. The same could not be said for the tractors. Lars glanced toward the farm of his closest neighbor, Will Crawford, where the large red tractor had stopped moving. The other tractors, too, were still. He could see Will, trudging through the snow, struggling to get his machine started again. Lars felt a pang of sympathy but no sense of triumph. He wasn't competing with anyone, he was simply surviving the storm as best as he could. By dusk, the blizzard showed no sign of letting up. But Lars, undeterred, pushed forward, his work proving the value of his old-fashioned, seemingly outdated plow. His neighbors had laughed at the toy that could never survive the winter. Now, Lars was proving that the test of time wasn't about machines and modern engines, it was about the knowledge and craftsmanship that lasted just as he had learned from his father's steady hands. Lars's path was carved, and the storm, though harsh, had nothing on the plow he guided with careful hands. The storm raged through the night, with snow piling higher and higher as the hours passed. Lars barely noticed the passage of time, his focus solely on the task at hand. The wind was howling, the temperature dropping even further, but the old plow never wavered. It cut through the snow and ice like a knife through butter, its solid frame unyielding against the weight of winter. By morning, the snow had settled into a thick blanket across the land, the world outside transformed into a shimmering white desert. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and the wind had settled into a bone-chilling chill that cut through even the thickest layers of clothing. Lars knew that it would be another grueling day, but the work had to be done. His plow was still cutting a steady path, clearing the field as he moved methodically forward. Across the prairie, his neighbors' tractors were no longer moving. From a distance, Lars could see them stranded in the snow, engines sputtering, their drivers desperately trying to get the machine started again. The hum of modern technology had been replaced by the eerie silence of stalled equipment, unable to withstand the ferocity of the storm. Lars didn't gloat, nor did he feel the satisfaction of proving anyone wrong. Instead, he felt a quiet sense of relief. His methods, slow, steady, and steadfast, had withstood the test of winter. His plow had not broken, it had not stalled. The work was grueling, but it was the kind of work he was used to, the kind of work he respected. And, in the midst of this blizzard, it was the only kind of work that mattered. He continued to push forward, his hands cold but steady, his breath misting in the frigid air. The sound of the plow scraping against the snow was the only noise that cut through the stillness of the morning. It was a simple, steady rhythm, each movement carving out a path of survival. By mid-afternoon, the storm had slowed, and Lars paused to catch his breath. He looked around the land he had cleared, the snow now piled high on either side, but the path in front of him was clear and safe. He wiped the snow from his brow and surveyed the surrounding land. The tractors were still stuck, the drivers huddled in their cabs, struggling to restart their engines. Lars knew it was only a matter of time before the storm worsened again, but he had his path, and he was ready for whatever came next. It wasn't about speed. It wasn't about doing things the fastest or the easiest way. It was about endurance, patience, the ability to see beyond the immediate and prepare for the unknown. And Lars, with his old-fashioned plow, had done just that. Across the field, he saw Will Crawford stumbling toward him through the snow. Will's face was red with cold, his hands stiff from the chill. His once pristine tractor was still stuck, buried in the snow, unable to get traction. Lars stood quietly, waiting as Will approached. His neighbor was breathing heavily, clearly struggling with the cold and exhaustion. "You were right, Lars," Will said, his voice hoarse from the wind. "I didn't think you could do it, but you did. You've made it through the worst of it. And he paused, shaking his head. "I was wrong." Lars smiled softly, but there was no need for words. Will didn't need to apologize. Lars wasn't about proving a point. He was about surviving, and that was something that went beyond pride. It was something that required humility and the willingness to learn. The storm had tested them all, and Lars had passed the test. His method had endured where others had failed. He wasn't just building a plow, he was building a legacy of craftsmanship, patience, and respect for the land. The storm eventually passed, as all storms do, but its impact lingered long after the snow had settled. When the sun finally peeked through the gray clouds, Lars stood on the porch of his cabin, surveying the land he had cleared. The air was crisp and clean, the light of the morning sun shimmering off the freshly fallen snow. He took a deep breath, inhaling the quiet peace that followed the storm. The world seemed still, almost as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The landscape was raw, untouched by the hands of machinery, and for a moment Lars felt connected to something older. It was as if the land itself had welcomed him back into its fold, as it had done for generations before him. But as the days passed, Lars could sense a shift in the air. His neighbors were still struggling with the aftermath of the blizzard, their tractors still stuck in the snow, their farms temporarily crippled by the storm. Yet Lars was steady. He had no machinery to break down, no engine to fix. His plow had weathered the storm with the same consistency it had stood through countless others. Soon enough, word of Lars's success spread through the community. Farmers who had once mocked him now sought him out, asking questions, admiring the simplicity and durability of his method. Lars was approached by several of his neighbors, including Will Crawford, who had made the trek to see Lars in the days following the storm. "You weren't kidding, Lars," Will said, his face reflecting both admiration and a new understanding. "I never would have thought it, but I've learned something about the land and about myself from this storm. Your plow wasn't just a tool, it was an answer to a question I didn't even know I had." Lars nodded. He wasn't one to boast, but it was clear to him now that his approach to life had offered more than just a method of farming. It had taught others the importance of patience, perseverance, and the quiet strength that could be found in simplicity. As the weeks turned into months, the farmers of the Great Plains began to change. Their approach to the land shifted subtly, influenced by the lessons learned in the aftermath of the storm. Many began to see the value of Lars's methods. The tractors were still in use. Of course, they had their place, especially for large-scale work. But more and more, the old-fashioned plow was becoming a respected tool. Lars's steady pace, his ability to anticipate the needs of the land, had become a symbol of the kind of farmer who respected nature's power instead of trying to conquer it. It was no longer just about survival. It was about understanding the land. Lars had built something lasting, something that had stood the test of time. His neighbors had learned that there was more than one way to farm the land, more than one way to endure the challenges that came with it. And they had learned it from the quiet, patient man who had never stopped believing in the power of simple tools and steady hands. The storm had passed, but Lars had made sure that his legacy would endure far beyond the winter. The seasons changed, as they always did, and with each passing year, Lars Nilsen's farm grew quieter. He had grown older, his hair touched with more gray, and his hands, once strong and steady, now trembled slightly with age. But the land, and the work he did on it, never lost its pull. His plow still stood, an enduring monument to the patience, wisdom, and care that Lars had built his life upon. The nearby farms had changed too. The tractors that once mocked Lars's humble method now sat idly in barns, engines cold. Their owners had learned the hard way that not all technology was foolproof. Lars's neighbors, who had once ridiculed him for his careful, slow approach, now sought his advice. Some even adopted the old-fashioned plow, though they used their modern tractors for other work. Lars was no longer the outcast. He had become the quiet sage, respected for his unwavering belief that hard work, simplicity, and careful thought were the real tools for survival. One cold morning, Lars woke to find a group of young farmers gathered at the edge of his land. They were standing near the old plow, staring at it with reverence, as if the weathered wood and rusted steel held secrets they were eager to learn. Lars approached them, not with pride, but with the same humble curiosity that had guided him his entire life. They asked him questions about the storm, the plow, and how he knew to build it the way he had. Lars didn't give them a lecture. Instead, he spoke simply, sharing what he had learned over the years. The value of preparation, the importance of understanding the land, and the quiet power of persistence. "I didn't know that blizzard would come," Lars told them. "But I knew something worse could come one day, and when it does, you can't build for it in the moment. You build for it before the storm hits." That's the real lesson. Lars stood there with the young farmers, watching the wind nine de blank the plaid land stretch out before him. He had spent a lifetime carving his path through the world, and now, it seemed, that path was leading others toward a deeper understanding of what it meant to farm, to survive, and to respect the land. As the years went by, Lars's legacy continued to ripple through the farming community. His old plow was passed down through generations, not as a relic of the past, but as a symbol of the timeless values he had embodied. The next generation of farmers learned from his example, finding that, in a world full of fast solutions and quick fixes, there was true strength in simplicity. And, when the storms came, they were ready. Lars Nilsen had built more than just a farm. He had built a lasting way of life, one that had weathered the toughest winters, stood firm through the harshest winds, and most importantly, had inspired others to do the same. His tools had outlasted time itself. And in doing so, they became part of a story that would be passed on long after the last snowflake fell.